Big friend of ours. He is one of the top leading experts in the country. You asked for folks who kind of really know the world and the sector to come here to kind of help us out, who understands media and with the trends, what's going on. But in addition to that piece, which is important as an expert, he's a great friend of ours, and I just wanted to let you know what he's gone through so we take care of him, and still for him to kind of be here with us today is incredible. A good friend of ours, Rob Tersick.
And thank you, Paula. I'm really thrilled to be here today. Most of the work that I do is with for-profit companies, and I work all over the world helping them navigate the future, how to develop strategies for the future. And I don't often get the opportunity to talk to public television groups. I consider it a great honor to be here today because I believe that the mission that you are executing is supremely important. As our media marketplace starts to get all kinds of fragmentized across different platforms, people are looking for a place that they trust, a brand that they know and recognize, that has some credibility in a world where credibility seems to be a pretty elusive phenomenon. And I believe that place is PBS. I'm very, very pleased to be here today. Now, a few months ago, I was invited to do a talk at the PBS annual meeting, and they wanted me to talk about the future of television. I said, that's actually hard. Last April, it was hard to talk about the future of TV because there were three big decisions that were coming down the pipeline in Washington. The first one was the Supreme Court decision about Aereo. And at the time, we didn't know how that was going to play out. If you're not familiar, I'm sure you are familiar, but it seemed to me that Aereo actually had a pretty good story. In 1999, TiVo introduced the idea of time shifting, where people could record something on a DVR and watch it whenever they wanted to. That survived many legal challenges, so that behavior became acceptable, and the commercial broadcasters learned how to cope with it. In 2005, Slingbox introduced the idea of place shifting. That's the idea that you could record a video in one place and then watch it somewhere else. So if you were, for instance, traveling, you could watch a home sports game on your computer. You could beam that into your hotel room or something like that. And there was no legal challenge. Strangely, the commercial broadcasters didn't sue Slingbox. And then they got acquired by Dish, and Dish started to roll that technology in. And so Aereo basically said, why don't we combine the two things together, time shifting and place shifting. We'll create kind of a cloud DVR, and we'll offer that as a service to people who want to pay a subscription fee. Well, the Supreme Court didn't quite see their argument that way, and as you know, the way the story ends, they got crushed for copyright infringement on a massive scale. So that is the end of the story of Aereo, or is it? Well, not quite, because just a couple of weeks ago, about 8 weeks ago, Tom Wheeler of the FCC came out with this very intriguing statement. She said he'd like to redefine internet video to compete with cable satellites. So this idea of a cloud DVR or some sort of cloud video service didn't actually get crushed in that Aereo decision. That was what I was concerned about last April. I couldn't predict how that would go down. But as you'll see shortly, I'm going to show you some examples of some amazing innovations. So they preserved the notion, even though that particular company did not make it. There were a couple of other decisions in the works. A big one that Paula referred to, the merger between Comcast and Time Warner Cable. That proposed merger, they were meant to rule on whether they could go forward with that for antitrust reasons this summer. But in fact, it's been put on hold, and it will be on hold for a while, because there's a third decision in the works, and that's the FCC's decision about net neutrality. This is a pretty hot topic, as you probably have been following in recent days. Just at CES this week, Tom Wheeler again came forward and made it pretty clear that he and President Obama are inclined towards reclassifying broadband as Title II. That'll make it a common carrier. It'll be a regulated utility. And you can also imagine that there's a lot of telecom companies who don't like that designation very much. So we're going to get ready for a big knockdown, drag 'em out fight in Washington that'll last well into the spring. The new rules from the FCC on net neutrality will be coming out in February. So we're really not going to know what happens with Comcast acquiring Time Warner Cable. And we're also not going to quite know what the future of broadband is going to be. My sense is that Tom Wheeler is structuring this in a way that's going to be acceptable, at least to cable companies, but I gather that the telephone companies are already very much resisting it. So watch this space. Those three big decisions, unfortunately, two of them haven't been resolved. And of course, the Aereo one, it turns out, was answered by the Supreme Court, but we haven't closed the door on cloud DVR. So it means that there's a lot of change that could be ahead. Now, I'm not the only guy who looks into a crystal ball, but what I've noticed is over years, a lot of the people who talk about the future of TV they tend to make these really dark pronouncements, and they tend to be wrong. And so you've seen statements like this. Here's the editor of the Manchester Guardian. Before there even was commercial television in the 1920s, he just heard the word and said, there's no good that can come out of a word that's half Greek and half Latin. And then in the 1940s, Darryl Zanuck, who was one of the most successful movie producers at the time, he started 20th Century Fox. And he said, TV will never be able to hold on to a market because people will get bored of staring into a plywood box each night. So here you have a really smart producer who couldn't quite get it right. And then my favorite statement of all, the president of Boston University in 1950 said, if television continues at the current level of programs, we are destined to have a nation of morons. I think this should be part of your mission statement. It's such a great thing for PBS, isn't it? It's like, that's what we're fighting against. That's why we're working so hard here to keep the standards up a little bit so we don't have a nation of morons. So I think when you hear pundits talk about the future of TV, it's a good idea to think twice. Take all of those statements with a grain of salt. You're going to see all kinds of stories now coming after CES, because there always are every year. These stories come out with all sorts of wild speculation about what the future of television will consist of. And there's one story in particular that there's no factual basis for it, but it keeps coming up like a bad penny. It keeps turning up no matter how many weeks or months go by. It's this story about the death of television. The death of TV may be just 5 years away, they say breathlessly. And if you do a search for this on Google, you will find thousands of blogs that have repeated this exact same expression, the death of television. It all comes from a 2011 Credit Suisse analyst report that said, if the following trends hold true, it could spell the death of television. Well, of course, on the internet today, what you do is you cut out the if, the qualifier, and you just run with that headline because it gets a lot of clicks. There are literally thousands of websites that have this phrase, the death of television, in it. It certainly attracts a lot of clicks on the web. Unfortunately, there is no substance to the rumor. TV's not dying. TV's actually booming as an industry. It's doing fantastically well. It is true that the big broadcast networks have a ratings problem and their advertising sales are reflecting that. That's definitely true. But as a culture, we love watching TV. Cable television and pay TV around the world is expected to continue to grow. It's not growing at the rate of internet, but this is a mature business that still throws off a very healthy profit margin. So the television business is actually much more sound than those internet pundits would lead you to believe. Besides, it's our most popular habit in the United States. Americans love TV. That's just a fact. But TV is evolving, don't get me wrong. There's tremendous pressure on television to evolve, to do something different. Actually, what's so astonishing is that TV managed to maintain its business model and maintain such success in spite of the onslaught of the internet. When the internet seems to have crushed the music business, it's totally reinvented print magazines and newspapers and so forth. But for the past 15 years, TV's gone from strength to strength to strength. And so, in a way, it's been amazing to me that television hasn't been more damaged or impacted by the internet competition. But it is beginning to evolve. So this fall, on October 15, you got this announcement. Rich Bressler at HBO announced for the first time HBO is going to offer direct-to-consumer access to their programming. So they're going to kind of beginning to unbundle, get outside of that cable TV system. And the very next day, CBS announced that they were going to follow HBO, and they were also going to offer something direct on the web to consumers. They were going to unbundle and go a la carte to consumers. And the very next day after that, Univision announced that they too were going to go direct to consumers and offer their own standalone package. And so you can start to see the lemming-like strategies of the big media companies. You know, when one guy goes, they all sort of follow right away. But the point is that they want to be where their audience is. They understand people are moving to digital platforms. They also understand that people are complaining and have been complaining for many years about the high price they pay for packaged television and for pay TV. So they're trying to respond to that. There's a little bit of deception in these announcements because these aren't true standalone direct-to-consumer products. They're being sold through traditional distributors, so they're just a version, I would call it like a variant, a small package. We saw similar announcements this week at CES. So Dish is now offering Sling as a $20 package that includes a lot of the most popular cable TV channels. So this is like a skinny bundle. That's what they're calling it, a skinny bundle. People complain about having to pay for too many channels they don't watch. So now they're going to offer a bundle of 20 or 30 channels for a low price, and it includes ESPN, which is actually pretty significant. So their big win here is they closed the deal with Disney and got those very popular channels in that package. So that's the offering from Dish Network. And then we also heard an announcement at CES from Verizon. And they announced that they're going to be they've been rumored to do this for almost 5 years. So I'm amazed it took them this long. they bought that platform that Intel built a couple years ago that didn't seem to ever go anywhere. It was a great pay-per-view or video-on-demand platform. Intel was going to try to like sidestep or go around or unbundle the pay TV ecosystem. They couldn't execute because they couldn't get the content. So Verizon bought it for cheap, and now they're using that system to offer something. What's interesting about the Verizon announcement, they're going to do a skinny bundle that's optimized for mobile devices. And later in this talk, I'll tell you why that's so very important. I know Paula had just mentioned mobile and how you're migrating from video on the desktop computer towards optimizing for tablets and for mobile phones. That's super important. Verizon's on it. So there are new skinny bundles aimed at the phone. Anyway, so back to the internet, the way the bloggers cover this, they're like, hurrah, yay, this is the end of television. Again, we get this meme this week back in full force. They think we're starting to deconstruct the TV ecosystem, taking apart that walled garden brick by brick in some sense. I think my takeaway on this is a little different. I say beware bloggers bearing uninformed opinions because they just shoot from the hip and they say this crazy stuff, and a lot of them don't understand how the TV business works. I think there's a lot of magical thinking that goes on when people talk about the future of TV. There seems to be this zeal to like destroy the TV industry, and I'm not quite sure where that comes from because it seems to me people still like watching their sports, they still like watching shows like Game of Thrones, and so there has to be a business model to support that kind of programming. But somehow on the internet there's this belief that everything should be free and everything will be eventually free, and I just think that's magical thinking. So sometimes you'll read reports or you'll read blog posts about people who say, someday all TV will be unbundled and sold a la carte, direct to consumers. The reality is every analyst who's looked at that possibility comes to the conclusion that the numbers don't add up. And for the consumer, that would be a really bad deal. It'd be a bad deal because just that CBS channel I mentioned earlier, their direct offering is $5.99. And I think the HBO one is going to be $10, if I'm not mistaken, or $8. If you start adding that up, obviously, if you get 7 or 8 channels, you're going to be paying more for those a la carte channels than you'd be paying for the bundle. It turns out that the pay TV bundle is actually a really good deal. It's just that cable companies are incredibly bad at explaining that to customers. So people have this kind of built up level of resentment towards their cable and satellite companies, when in fact they've been getting a really good deal. They get access to a ton of content. And it's a weird business model, right? Because that cross-subsidy is what makes it possible to program so diversely. It's for so many channels to spend so much on fantastic original programming. So if we start to unbundle, you won't have that cross-subsidy and actually be a shrinkage. There's an analyst named Laura Martin. She works from the Needham Company. You may have read her research. It's superb if you haven't. And she did a comprehensive analysis of this model. And she said that if we do unbundle TV, if that actually does happen at some point in the future, the net reduction in the size of the TV industry will be 50%. Half the jobs, half the programming. She believes that 200 channels will disappear overnight. I think that makes good sense if you think about those economics. So the bundle actually makes sense. The cross-subsidy makes sense. Another concept is that all TV channels will be delivered over the internet, that we're just going to somehow stop broadcasting altogether. I think this is magical thinking as well. And the reason I think that's a magical thinking is the desire for this is to get away from the control that the cable, particularly the cable companies have. People really dislike the level of control the cable companies have in their life. And so the idea is if we somehow move everything to OTT, we'll get away from those nasty cable companies. Well, I've got bad news for those people. They're wrong. Actually, if we go OTT, it actually really reinforces the grip that the MVPDs have because the cable companies are the ones that provide more or less all the broadband in the United States, certainly the fast-speed broadband, unless you're one of the lucky few who has Verizon Fios. But in any case, the OTT services are actually a great business proposition for the network operators like Comcast and Time Warner Cable. Broadband's a much more profitable product for them. So they would love it if everybody moved over to broadband and they would get out of this complicated video business with its upfront licensing fees and so forth. They could just get into this pure pipeline business. So that would actually be a great reality. It would not be a great outcome for consumers. Now, on the television industry side, some of my clients also have some magical thinking. And so a lot of the companies that I work with persist in the notion that they can impose their traditional TV business model on the internet. And again, this is magical thinking coming from the opposite side of the table. It's magical thinking because it turns out the internet already has a business model. Thank you very much. We don't need to import one from television. It's quite a different business model. Now, let me talk exactly about what I mean by that. See, for years, we've been believing in this word convergence, and the notion was that someday all of the content that we consume would be cross-platform, and we'd be able to access anything from anywhere and so forth. We're starting to see a manifestation of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all the exact same program runs exactly the same way on everything. In fact, I think it means the opposite of that. Instead of convergence, we're starting to see divergence on a grand scale. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was invited up to Canada to talk to the Canadian Media Fund. And they were looking for perspectives on this because in the past, they were the film fund and then they were the film and TV fund, and now they're the media fund because they're trying to support new media as well. And so I was trying to explain this to them. I used this analogy, which was confusing. I'm going to try it and see if I can get it right with you guys. So I said, look, what's happening now, it looks like to me, when I look at the internet and I look at the traditional TV business, I see two parallel universes that don't actually overlap or intersect that much. They're two separate universes. One of the universes, everything is converging and consolidating and getting tighter together. It's all kind of converging on a single, bright, intense place. I don't want to use the word collapsing because that sounds very negative, but all of it seems to get really intense and focused on one particular point. And then in the other universe, what you've got is exact opposite, where it's just expanding and exploding at an incredible clip. So it's expanding. One is contracting, one is expanding. And I think I've lost everybody in the room now because you're going like, okay, he's talking about space. I think, how does this connect to television? Let me explain what I mean. So here we have parallel universes. The 21st century business model, the mass media business model, the industrial scale business model for television was highly centralized. It was highly consolidated. You needed to invest millions in infrastructure like satellite uplinks and towers and stations and so forth. Therefore, it's very expensive, and in order to extract some profit out of that, we had to sell this stuff bundled, and we had to make the content very, very scarce and high-priced. So those are the economics that drove 20th century television. But when you look at 21st century media, this other universe I'm referring to, it's massively decentralized. Anybody can be a publisher, anybody can create a program, anybody can distribute. So all those problems have been solved. It scales infinitely. In fact, one of the interesting things about YouTube video is that it appeals to audiences all over the world simultaneously. And so the internet broadcasters, if you call them that, they have the opportunity to reach audiences on a scale that broadcast companies, television companies, never could dream of. It's highly dispersed, it's cheap, it's unbundled, and it's super abundant. Let's take a little look. Let's drill in. First, let's take a look at this old model. So Paula mentioned consolidation. She mentioned that 20 years ago, there were about 50 companies that provided us with media, and today that number is actually 6. There are 6 big companies that control about 90% of what Americans watch and consume in electronic media. 6 big companies. I can only fit 4 of them on this slide. I was trying to figure out how to fit all 6, so forgive me. The ones that aren't here are Disney and CBS. What's interesting is after decades and decades of consolidation, you would think these would be diversified media companies. But actually what it turns out is they're basically pay TV providers, channel providers, who happen to own theme parks and movie studios that don't make any real money for them. Most of the operating profit that comes from these major media companies comes from pay television, overwhelmingly in the case of Viacom and Time Warner. So consolidation has led them to kind of double down on that pay TV business. That's why they're defending it so fiercely. That's why they're fighting upstart companies like Aereo so fiercely. There's a lot more concentration coming. So I mentioned the Comcast and Time Warner Cable merger. Well, that's triggered a whole game of musical chairs now. All sorts of other companies are looking for a dance partner. So AT&T immediately teamed up with DirecTV. There's a rumor this week that Verizon's going to buy AOL. I hope they don't. I think it'd be a disaster, but they might. They need some kind of response to this. And now you're starting to see on the the program provider side, Fox would like to acquire Time Warner, the media company. Of course, the guys at Time Warner would prefer they didn't do that because they'll all be on the street looking for a job. And politically speaking, that would be a very interesting combination. I don't think you'll see Bill Maher's show on HBO if Murdoch buys it. But anyway, you're going to start to see some consolidation. There's speculation that Discovery is up for grabs. There's speculation that Viacom might be in play later this year. Fox made a run at Time Warner earlier last year. There's rumors that they're going to come back at the end of 2015 and try it again. I guess they've already modeled it out on paper, and it makes a good deal of sense. So you're going to start to see some companies get acquired. You're going to start to see fewer big media companies out there. That's almost a fact. Now, another kind of consolidation that's happening is almost like a preemptive strike. I've done a lot of work with Time Warner and Turner. Those companies are incredibly profitable. They're posting record profits. So they're doing fantastically well. All of the Time Warner media companies are doing fantastically well, and yet they continually downsize. And it's really weird when you go visit those companies because everyone's bummed out. They just fired another 1,500 people here, or 300 people at HBO, or Turner let go 1,000 people or something. And you scratch your head and say, wait, if the company's doing so well, why are they downsizing? The reason they're trying to downsize is they're trying to keep their share price high enough so that Fox can't afford to buy them. And this is job preservation for the senior management team because they know they'll be right out on the street if News Corp acquires them. It's astonishing, right? If you think about that, that's what's happening right now. So we're kind of preemptively downsizing in order to stave off an acquisition attempt. That's another form of consolidation. And here's a third one. So in the past 2 years, we started to see a further wave of consolidation where traditional media companies, big media giants, are buying the multi-channel networks, the MCNs, the biggest of the MCNs. The first one that got acquired was Awesomeness TV. They got bought by DreamWorks. That was followed by Disney's $500 million acquisition of Maker Studios. And then Peter Chernin, who used to be the chairman of Fox, teamed up with AT&T to buy Fullscreen. And RTL, the German giant, they bought StyleHall, and they also bought a controlling interest in broadband TV in Canada. So what you're seeing is traditional media companies are going, gee, we need to be in that MCN business. We don't know how to get in that business. It's a very different business from television, but it looks like it might be the future, so we better get in there and buy. And they're paying high prices for that. So far, these are actually performing fairly well as acquisitions, which surprised me because they operate by completely different economics. As I mentioned earlier, they're decentralized, infinite scale, dispersed. Those MCNs, by the way, there's no back catalog. There's no aftermarket. There's no windowing. There's no time-based sequential release of that program. That programming, it's like a grocery store. You put the stuff up on YouTube, somebody watches it or not, and then it's over and people move on. You have to do new, fresh content every single day. It's a little bit like running a news program. There's very little opportunity to monetize the way we monetize program in television. So the 21st century media companies operate at gigantic scale. And the example I was using for a while was this one of YouTube. So this shows how many hours of video are uploaded every minute to YouTube. That's hours uploaded by users every minute of the day. So as you can see all the way back to 2007, there was kind of an exponential curve here where the amount of content being uploaded was doubling almost steadily every 18 months. Doubling and doubling and doubling until we got to a point here around 2012 where an hour of video was being uploaded every second, which is a crazy idea. 72 hours of video were uploaded. Last year, it was 100 hours of video being uploaded every single minute of the day. So that's an astonishing figure, but then I thought, well, that was 2013. So this morning, I got up a little bit early. I said, well, let's see, did that number continue to grow? And in 2014, what happened last year? Here's what happened. Between 2013, 100 hours of video is uploaded every minute. Look at this. 300 hours of video are being uploaded every minute of the day to YouTube. This number is mind-blowing. It would be impossible for you to watch the amount of video that's being uploaded. No one can possibly do it. YouTube serves half the video on the internet, and on any given night, they're consuming 30% of the bandwidth at prime time in the United States. YouTube is a colossus of video. Google is a dominant player because they own YouTube. They are a dominant player in the video space. In fact, do you know what the number 2 search engine is? Yeah, it's YouTube. I kind of blew that, right? And not such a great setup there. But it's an amazing thing, right? You think Google, and probably number 2 is going to be Microsoft Bing or something, and then maybe down there be YouTube, or maybe some Asian, maybe a Chinese search engine or something would be number 3 or something, but it's not true. Google's number 1, and number 2 is YouTube. When people search for video, they go to YouTube. If they don't find it on YouTube, it doesn't exist. They stop searching for it. It's just amazing. So YouTube is this enormous repository of video. So really, when we talk about these two parallel universes, you've got 20th century media companies that created great content and created empires based on content. But on the right side, what's really driving this change is that they're not so much media companies, they're platforms like YouTube, these gigantic platforms, and they operate at a completely different kind of scale and a completely different business. They're focused on audience maximization. They're focused on reach. They're focused on getting as many viewers from around the world as they possibly can. Where traditional media companies, because they're publicly held and they have a very established business model that analysts understand well, they're held accountable to revenue maximization and profit maximization. These are old things. That actually gates your ability to go out and get your content out in as many places as possible. So the traditional media companies are hindered. They've been hindered from competing in exactly the same way in these new environments. And that's one of the reasons why the new companies have been able to grow so very quickly. But actually, for the TV companies, the situation's even worse. It's not like they compete, because their content has been kind of absorbed into these platforms. You see, television is just an app on somebody else's platform. Apple's the biggest, so with 1.3 million apps right now, Apple's ecosystem claims to have the largest and most comprehensive catalog of apps that's available. But they're not the only ones. At CES this week, you saw dozens and dozens and dozens of new devices, from dishwashers to wristwatches. All of them have an app store that comes with it. And if you look at those menus, here's an example of a Samsung TV. One thing you'll notice here when you look at this is I don't see any television company logos. Sure, I see MLB and YouTube, I see Flickr and the Wall Street Journal. Where's NBC or CBS? This is actually really troubling if you're a TV company. We're looking at a television set here, no TV logos. Yeah, there's a thing called TV shows. That doesn't serve a network very well to sell the shows one drink at a time. And it gets even worse. When you drill into some of these menus, you get this, a sort of sea of different logos for different apps that are available. And now our great prestige broadcast brands in the United States, they're reduced to a chiclet-sized button this big, and they're competing with all these no-name companies nobody's ever heard of. So suddenly, their field of competition has expanded from, say, 4 big broadcast networks and maybe 100 cable channels that really are significant. Now suddenly, they're competing with thousands and thousands and thousands of applications that are going for the exact same audience, the exact same eyeballs, the exact same wallet. And the competition comes from a lot of different quarters in this app space. Here's a newspaper and a magazine. Of course, all the print companies are getting into video in a big way. They've got nothing to lose. The print business is finished. If they don't turn themselves into video providers, they don't have a future. And so they have absolutely taken this kind of got nothing to lose, go for it attitude. And that puts pressure on TV companies, particularly news companies, because they have great competition coming from these publications. It doesn't end there. A lot of the mobile apps that deal with video reinvent video in a way that changes the user. This is really important. So it's not just about watching video on a tablet or a smartphone. It's about creating video and sharing video and marking up video and editing video, manipulating video, and spreading it around. That's a gigantic shift. It means it's the end of the passive consumer who sits at home, and they're sort of now an active participant in the process of making and sharing video. There's something else that happens too. Some of these apps, like Vine teaches you to dispose video. You create the video, you record it, you share it with your friend, and then just like that Mission Impossible trailer back in the day, it self-destructs after somebody watches it. The video's gone. What is that teaching a whole generation of people? It's teaching that video is something that's disposable. You watch it once and you throw it away. We've all been trained that video is priceless. You keep it in an archive. You figure out all the ways that you can monetize it. You preserve it. You archive it. A whole generation has grown up with a completely different perception of what video is and how we treasure it, how we value it, how we preserve it. It means we have to rethink everything. This digital change is going to cause us to reconsider at the core, what is our business? What are we actually doing as broadcasters and as digital media providers? What are we really doing? It requires us to rethink our business model, not to take our old attitudes and our old business model and try to shoehorn them into this new space. We have to rethink everything from scratch. Now, every company has blind spots. Every company I deal with has blind spots. And a big part of what I try to do is show them their blind spots. And I'm going to submit to you that even the people in this room have some blind spots. Let me try to show a few of them to you. So the first one is to rethink scale. Recently, just a year or two ago, I was talking to some folks at NBC about the internet and about internet video. And they said, oh yeah, we tried putting up YouTube videos. It's a bunch of web junk. It's a bunch of small stuff. Nobody wants to watch that. This is NBC. And I was like, you know, your thinking might be a little bit out of date there, guys. So here's data that just came in. It's a little bit of an eye chart. So let me explain what this is. This shows you US basic cable channels. And over here on the left, Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, USA. So that shows you the amount of video that's being produced and consumed. The average is over here. So these are the top 50. And then you get the 50 to 100, and they get way back here to 200 and 200 and beyond. So the average is right here. What's interesting is companies like Maker Studios, Fullscreen, Machinima, Broadband TV, when you lay them up against cable TV channels, you find that they're actually producing approximately as much content as major cable channels are. Not in the top 50, but in that second 50 to 100. They're now competing with those cable channels, and they're reaching audiences that are comparable. Here's data that was just released from BuzzFeed. You know BuzzFeed, right? They're like the masters of the link bait headline. You know, these two guys did this awesome thing. You won't believe what happened next, right? That's BuzzFeed. They're famous for that headline and variants of that. You would think the stuff is kind of a joke, maybe not take it that seriously, but obviously they figured out a formula that really, really works. works, and they're attracting a huge audience. They started to get into video in a big way a couple of years ago. It's a fairly new step for them. Check this out. They used their Nielsen data and laid it up against cable channels, and they discovered that their audience is bigger than MTV and Comedy Central. It's almost as big as AMC and FX. That's BuzzFeed. This is a company that didn't exist 4 years ago. And when you look at that coveted 18 to 34-year-old demographic, check out BuzzFeed. They actually have greater reach than NBC and CBS in the coveted 18 to 34-year-old demographic. So we can make fun of these guys for their link-bait headlines, but they've figured out a formula that seems to resonate with this audience. There's much to be learned here. How many folks here are familiar with Twitch? Raise your hand if you're not familiar. Raise your hand if you're not familiar. Remember, I was going to tell you about blind spots. Here comes one. So Twitch. You haven't heard of Twitch. What is Twitch? Twitch allows someone to record themselves while they're playing a video game, and they can broadcast that to an audience. Yeah, okay, right, you go, okay, who would ever want to watch this? You're not watching a video game, you're not playing the video game, you're watching somebody else someplace else play a video game, okay? Well, it turns out a lot of people want to watch this. It's incredibly compelling. 55 million viewers in the United States. At any given time in prime time, they've got 500,000 people watching. The average viewing session in prime time is 90 minutes. They are crushing MTV, Sci-Fi, TNT, and AMC because it skews heavily male, as you can imagine, given the content. It skews heavily male. They're pulling a key demographic away from the pay TV ecosystem. 58% of them watch more than 20 hours a week. This is an incredibly loyal audience. Twitch, about 4 months ago, was acquired by Amazon for $1 billion. YouTube wanted to buy them. It was going to be the first YouTube acquisition. But YouTube was concerned because they're the biggest video platform and Twitch is the biggest live video platform on the web, and they were worried about the Department of Justice and whether or not they'd pass regulatory approval. And so in the interim, Amazon got in there. Now Amazon, you might go, why would Amazon do this? This is really important for two reasons for Amazon. The first one is Amazon's got a big push in games and in content in general, and they have all these devices, and they want to get that gamer crowd interested in Amazon devices. So that's one of it. They're buying an audience. But the second thing is contextual advertising. Amazon doesn't like to buy ads. And they can't get enough traffic from YouTube. And so they're trying to find new ways to get ads in front of people and get click-throughs. So they're going to basically collapse that business cycle where advertisers would do an upfront buy on television, and then 6 months later there'd be shows and there'd be an audience, and maybe that would convert to sales. That whole thing, Amazon's saying, why don't we just own the channels, and we'll do our own direct purchasing embedded right into programming there. And we can do away with the advertising, do away with the agency, do away with the upfront altogether. You're seeing them collapse that old business model of broadcast TV. I think we need to rethink channels. We need to rethink channels because there's been this idea that's prevalent. It's not just limited to television or media. It's true of all marketing where we have to think omni-channel. But I think that's actually not quite useful to think omni-channel because that tends to be we're going to do the same thing on all these different platforms, and I think that's a mistake. That won't necessarily work. What VOD does is it really means at the end of channels. This is bad news for the cable companies, the companies that provide cable channels. This is a real problem for them. I'd argue that their brands have collapsed a little bit in the last few years. So now about half the video consumed in the United States is on demand, non-linear, or else it's on a DVR. And so that's a pretty big change. What happens over time is as people are watching video and they can just get the shows they want and not take the whole channel, what you're doing is you're starting to see a change to the basic business model of media. In the past, when we sold content in the analog days, what we sold was the container, and that was a proxy for the content inside of it. So you didn't buy a manuscript, you bought a book. You didn't buy a video game, you bought a video disc, right? You bought a game on a disc. You didn't buy a movie, you bought a DVD. So you were paying for the package, you were paying for the transport system, but what you were actually getting was access to the content. What's happening now with VOD and largely in the internet is we can now separate that content from the package. That's why I'm using this example of taking the kind of yolk out of the egg. You no longer need to buy the egg, you can just get the yolk. And that's a real change because it means for young audiences, here college kids, they have no idea what time slots are. They don't understand what a cable network is or a channel or a TV network is. This idea that you're going to run the same show at the same time across the whole country at the exact same moment, that they simply can't comprehend because they're growing up and getting conditioned to a world where everything's available on demand. They can get whatever they want. And so if you're trying to use a show to build a lead-in, trying to use a show to build a night, that's going to be really challenging with this audience. We also have to rethink audience. Audience is evolving just as TV is evolving. It's ludicrous for us to think that our kids are going to watch TV the way we watched TV when we were little kids, sitting on the couch with the potato chips right there in front of the television set. This idea of watching linear, scheduled, in-pattern, appointment-style viewing that's periodically interrupted with commercials, not on your networks, but on paid commercial networks. This idea that we're going to use these screen guides that were designed in the 1980s and 1990s, these clunky screen guides with these gigantic remote controls to fumble through them and so on, that makes no sense to this group. They look at it like, this is stupid. It doesn't work right. There have been 3 TV generations in the United States, the baby boomers, and I'm one of them. We got the color TV, we got movie of the week, we got cable and satellites, we got much more choice. And then you had Generation X, and they got all the digital toys, the DVD, the DVR, they got much bigger satellite packages, bigger cable packages, and they also got BitTorrent, the ability to file share. But the group I'm most interested in, and you should be as well, is the millennials. The millennials grew up with a completely different understanding of what video is and how it can be used. They grew up with YouTube, Slingbox, Roku, iTunes, these things that give you access to all sorts of video offers, many of which never even appeared on television before. They're not bound to the television. They're available on any gizmo that's out there. And then there's all these things like Skype and Vine and Instagram, Uvu, Snapchat, and 1,000 more that allow people to manipulate and create their own video. So it's actually changing the audience. It's changing their perception of what video services are. So among young people today, there's almost no distinction for them between Netflix and a cable channel. They identify with, they actually like Netflix more. They have higher affinity towards Netflix. Marshall McLuhan always used to say, technology changes us, right? First we shape the tools, then the tools shape us, because we start to adapt to them, and we adopt new habits that are fostered by those tools. That's certainly true with the computer. The passive viewer that would sit there and watch a whole night of television, watch whatever you had, and sit there watching it in pattern on schedule, that's over. That's a thing of the past. Today we have an activated audience that takes an active role in programming. They're going to create their own playlist. We used to think that the letters www stood for World Wide Web, but that's changed as well, because now it means whatever, whenever, and wherever. That's the expectation that this whole audience grew up with. People who grew up with broadband and grew up with computers and now have smartphones in their hands all the time. They have an expectation that they can get whatever they want. If they can't find your programming on the device that they happen to be on, they're just going to go find a substitute. It's not that hard to find a substitute. It hurts us. It hurts our ego. It hurts our pride to think that our programming is so replaceable. We like to think it's priceless and it's irreplaceable. And yes, of course, you can make that argument. But from the consumer standpoint, if they can't find what they're looking for on the device that they happen to have at that time, they're just going to find something else. They'll consume something else. They're not going to go look for it. TV companies persist in the notion that they're the first screen. But for a whole generation now, TV is the second screen. The first screen is the mobile phone. You know this yourselves. How many people here have ever taught a kid how to use a tablet, like a 5-year-old, how to use a tablet? Okay, great. So every time I talk to people, I ask them this now. I thought it was just me, and then a while ago I talked to a friend of mine who had the exact same experience. I'm going to tell you a little story. So I was with a little kid, a 5-year-old child, boy, and was showing him how to use a tablet. And in the beginning they mess up and it's kind of cute. But then they figure it out, and they love the fact that when they touch stuff, it responds, right? So they kind of get into that. Then they start going crazy, and they touch everything, they open everything, and then they get into trouble. And you sort of get them back, help them figure out how to find their way back to the home screen. Well, after about 15 or 20 minutes, a little kid really figures out how to use a tablet. Like they kind of master it in a half an hour. And then the next thing they do is chilling if you work in the TV business. Because they put the tablet down and they walk across the screen, walk across the room to the big flat screen TV, and they start putting their fingers on it. And the dads are in the room, and the dads are looking, going, "Oh, my priceless TV! You're gonna put your fingerprints all over the thing." But it's even worse because they touch the screen, they try to swipe, and nothing happens. And then they turn and they look at their mom and they say, "Mama, broken." Broken. A whole generation is growing up with the understanding that non-responsive media is broken. Media that doesn't respond directly to them is broken. That's what they're being conditioned to believe at an early age before they can even read. They're starting to get that programmed into their head. That's the expectation they come to. ComScore tells us that half of digital media time now is spent on mobile apps. And we've seen that, especially where they've deployed LTE, the high-speed mobile networks. Internet time doubles. Here's an example of that. June 2013, June 2014. That big green block is the amount of time we spend on mobile apps. You can see it doubled. Broadcast TV used to be a lot of different day parts, right? Back in the day, broadcast TV was sports, it was dramas, it was comedies, it was news, it was the weather, it was children's program, games, documentaries, and so forth. And then what happened when I was a young man, early in my career, we started launching cable networks, and we took each of those day parts and blew them out into a 24-hour cable channel. Well, now what's happening is all those channels are being turned into apps. And so companies like the Weather Channel are finding that their service isn't needed on the pay TV dial anymore because there's an app for that. They've actually been supplanted. They're being dropped by cable systems because they could use that space for something more valuable. And consumers already have a weather app on their phone. Smartphones are incredibly important. I mentioned that earlier, and I'll continue to say it. This is probably the most important takeaway that I've got for you today. Last year, we sold 1 billion smartphones. There are about 2 billion smartphones in use on the planet Earth right now. We'll continue to sell 1 billion more each year going forward till 2020, which means that by the end of this decade, there'll be about 6 billion smartphones on the planet Earth. Almost everybody in the world will have a smartphone. That's an extraordinarily important thing. And it rapidly becomes your primary point of access. Again, as I mentioned, we saw this big shift with the smartphones and then the high-speed LTE networks, the 4G networks. When those were deployed in the United States, we saw this massive shift. Online went down, desktop went down, desktop search is down, desktop video's flat. Mobile, everything is growing. In fact, it's the only medium that's growing, and it's growing very, very rapidly. This is a chart that just came out. It's really important. For years, I've been tracking how many minutes a day do we spend on mobile apps versus television. And last year in Q3, something amazing happened. People spent more time on mobile apps than they did spend watching television. A lot of times they're multitasking. But when they're multitasking, they're looking at their phone and the TV's on over here. They're paying attention to the phone or the tablet. And what's going on the screen, that's like wallpaper. It's sort of like radio with pictures. It's a real problem, right? Because if you're a commercial broadcaster, you're selling attention. That's what you sell to your advertisers. And the best the commercial broadcasters can offer right now is continuous partial attention. Their stuff's on in the background while kids are Facebooking. Of course, advertisers understand that. So advertisers are moving very, very quickly. And this is a projection going out to 2018, but you can see the big growth area is going to be mobile. My recommendation for you today is to focus on mobile. Don't be mobile first. Don't be mobile only. That's exaggerated. You've got to continue your core business. You've got to do that. You've got to offer all the stuff on the web that you offer already. But make sure mobile is an important part, not an afterthought, not something that you vend out to some little company down the street that doesn't know what they're doing. Make it important because your audience is looking at it that way. They start with mobile, and then they migrate back to media. And the point of this slide is that we're at the very beginning of this. We're going to start to see mobile become the primary point of access to the web and all media around the world in the next 5 years. Now, this may be a bummer, right? This part of the talk, you're probably going, why is he telling me all this depressing stuff? It feels like a knockout punch. It's not a knockout punch. Competition is good. It's what makes us do a better job, right? Otherwise, we get lazy and we sit back on our heels and we cease to innovate. My argument to the TV companies is that they stopped innovating about 10 years ago. The advent of VOD and the DVR, that was the last innovation in television. And no, I don't think 3D TV was a very successful innovation. And I'm not that hopeful about 4K. I don't think that's going to rescue the TV industry, really. This is just better formats, better resolution. It's not going to really make that huge of an impact on consumers. Competition is good, and TV has great strengths. TV has huge advantages, and you in particular at PBS have some of the best of these advantages. You have the best programming. You've got the best video quality. You've got much better reach than most mobile things. You've got awareness on a level that most mobile apps would love to have that kind of awareness. So you have tremendous advantages. You know, there's an article that was published by Nick Carr in the New York Times, and I wanted to include it here. It's a little old. It was a year ago that he wrote this, but it's such an important article, I wanted to include that. He said, you know, actually, we're in the golden age. We always look back at that Norman Lear era in the 1970s as kind of the golden age of television. It's not true. Look at those shows today. They're corny. I mean, they really feel schlocky. We live in a golden age of TV. We're making the best television programming ever in history. The reason we're doing it is because we have to work so much harder to get an audience. Competition's a good thing. It makes us get off our butts and work harder and deliver a better product. But that's not all. That's not all. You see, you're not just TV companies. You're more than TV. You are the best of both worlds, and I mean this most sincerely. I understand that some of the local stations here might not have a massive budget or a big team devoted to digital, but at PBS in Washington, you have a superb team. I know them personally. I've known Ira Rubinstein, who heads that team up. I've known him for 20 years. He's regarded as a genius in digital marketing in Hollywood, where he comes from. You have fantastic opportunities ahead of you because you've got the best of television, the best branding, the best reach, the best video, combined with the best of the internet. If you can find a way to work together, collaborate on the same internet platform, the way Mario was describing just a few moments ago, then you have an opportunity to get the best targeting and the best engagement, the best of both worlds, the best of TV and the best of digital. That's what's available to you in collaboration. And there's one more thing that PBS has that nobody else has got. And this is the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. What you have that no one else has in this fragmented media space, especially on the internet, is trust. You've got trust on a massive scale. You've got the trust of people. They believe in you so much that they part with their hard-earned cash. They give you money. You can't name another company in the world that does that. Thank you. Thank you. And it's not just trust for great programs. It's not just trust for great programs like Downton Abbey, for sure, right? The numbers speak for themselves. You are trusted on so many levels, so many parts of television that the commercial broadcasters abdicated years ago, like education and public policy and news programming and documentaries, and as Paula mentioned, film and independent film. You have trust on a massive level, and a level that commercial television simply cannot compete with. They've given it up. They squandered it years ago. And you have that as an advantage. That's really important because on the web, nobody knows who to trust. PBS can emerge as a trusted brand in all those important categories. That's why I respect so greatly what you do, not just in your dramas, not just in the news programming, but in the public policy and especially in the education programming. Nobody else is in the space. It's up to PBS to deliver this, and you have an amazing opportunity that spans both platforms. All right, that is all I've got for you today. I really do appreciate your taking my time and hearing me out today. Thank you. Thanks. Good.
So I want to say thanks to Rob again. Just so you know, we're going to get him on a plane as well, too. But rest assured, we've got this for you, so you're going to be able to have this. I know a number of folks are asking to be able to use it, show it at home. So you've got that as well, too. Another thing that's important to know about Rob and his relationship with us, as we mentioned, you all are kind of helping us get started with the first regional meeting. But Rob is kind of committed to be with us for at least the first 4 and going forward. So he's going to give him a big round of applause. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that because we're going to take a few questions right now, but know that we're going to be taking this to go to Nashville. And just like he mentioned, even from the annual meeting until now, things have changed. So he's going to keep us updated on those pieces. But we know we just got a little bit of time, so I just wanted to open it up. We keep talking about the future for our system. You've heard a lot of what he's put out here. A couple of questions, comments, reactions for Rob before he has to leave. What do you want to know? Jamie in the back.
Thank you, Rob. I think that was great. And for those that weren't at the annual meeting, I think it was a good opportunity to see this. You didn't talk a lot about Netflix and Amazon, and I know there's been some consternation among some of the big content creators about originally giving their content and selling their content for a fee for Netflix and Amazon. And do you think they'll continue to do that? And what do you think the future of those platforms are?
Oh, yeah, they have to. You can't. They're unavoidable, right? All of those is an on-demand version of home video. So I think you have to participate in that space. I don't think there's any choice. And those actually pay well, relatively speaking. For digital, that's not a bad business opportunity as well. The thing you have to recognize is that there's a group growing up that expects to see your programming on those platforms. And if it's not there, that's weird. They'll note that it's missing, and they won't look for it anymore. You really don't want to create that habit. Any other questions? Okay, well then, here we have one more.
Hi, thank you also. My name's Kelly from PBS. What do you think is the role of a local brand and a national brand in that environment that you just showed that is smattered with companies and organizations that kind of transcend traditional boundaries?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the big opportunity for the local stations is hyper-local. You really are part of the communities. I know it's been said before earlier today, and I noticed over here, the station of the future, one of the comments that's there, it says, we do our best when we do what the community tells us to do. I think that's incredibly important. Now, I talked about an activated audience and an audience that wants to respond and expects to be responded to. Well, you've been in that game for longer than anybody. One of the things I was continually surprised about when I worked in cable TV is how little attention we paid to the end user. We did all sorts of research. We wanted to know who they were and what they were doing and so on, but we didn't really listen to them. And I always thought it was kind of crazy. And they always said to me, well, that's like a radio thing. We don't do that. We're TV. Like radios, you call into a radio show. And I always try to find ways to put people on the air. I think the more the local stations can do to remind their audiences that you are local, that you're part of the community, that they can be involved here, that they can participate in a meaningful way with their station, and use your physical presence in these towns as a gathering point, as a focal point, as a place for people to talk about public policy and community issues, I think you can actually elevate your status, because there's a real loss of that today. We have a loss of that with local radio, with the giant consolidation that happened in the radio business. People feel like, particularly in the Midwest, there's nobody there at the station because it's just being piped in by iHeartRadio or what used to be called Clear Channel. So somebody far away is making a decision to program to them. That doesn't happen with PBS, but that's a story you need to remind people of. Social media is a great way to do it. I don't need to teach you, you know all about that. What I would say is that your colleagues in Washington at PBS have experts on staff who can actually be of assistance to you. One of the things I couldn't talk about today, but I did talk about at the national meeting, is crowdfunding. It's a big topic because, of course, you guys are like the original crowdfunded programmers. Before we had that cool term, you were already running your campaigns to drum up support from the local community. Well, crowdfunding is about more than raising money. It's about making a connection with people. It's about giving people a chance to put their thumbprint, put their dollar down on a program they want to see made. And you can really get a lot of commitment from people and a lot of passion behind it. And then if you do crowdfunding campaigns right, you don't just get their money commitment, you also get their social commitment. So they kind of endorse what you're proposing with their own personal brand amongst their friends. And if you get the influencers, they'll start to bring their friends, and it snowballs from there. Now, I know that Ira Rubinstein's team has done, I think, the last time I checked, 6 crowdfunding campaigns in affiliation with some of the local stations. So I would urge you to check that out. So there's a reservoir of expertise at the national level that I think can be of assistance to you. But I really think a trump card that you hold, that no other media companies hold, is local. And hyper-local can be very, very meaningful for you. Okay, I think I should probably head on.
Go.
I apologize, I gotta go on a flight. I got a tight flight to catch later on. I really enjoyed speaking to you, and this is a genuine privilege for me. I really, really respect what you are doing. I think your mission is so very important at this time of consolidation. There's nobody really in those categories I mentioned: education, public policy, news, documentaries. You're the only people who consistently and reliably bring the trusted programming that people respect, that people really need to be informed citizens. That's a really important mission. I want to underscore that because that is so very heartfelt from me and from millions and millions of people around the country who support PBS. Thank you for the opportunity to come speak to you today. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we'll see you. We'll see you soon. Okay. Thanks, Ralph.